Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, as many of you will recall, back in November of 2014, a young brother by the name of Tamir Rice, who was 12 years old at the time, was in a park playing with a toy gun. Apparently, some people called the police to complain. They complained about him pointing this toy gun at people. And the person that made that call said that he was probably a juvenile. The person also pointed out that the gun was probably fake. But when the people at 911 received the call, they did not pass that information on to the police. They simply told them about a person in the park with a gun. So the police arrived on the scene, and within seconds of them arriving, they shot and killed that young brother, Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy, shot and killed simply for playing with a toy gun in a park. And so there have been these investigations going on. There have been state investigations and federal investigations, and the Department of Justice conducted an investigation. And they have determined that they will not file any criminal charges against these officers. And what I'm going to do is summarize some of the points that they raised in their long explanation as to why they weren't bringing charges against the officers who killed Tamir Rice. I will post a link to their explanation, their letter, in the description box so that you all can read it for yourself. But essentially, this is what they claim. They claim that the officers made multiple commands for Tamir Rice to show his hands. They also claim that he was reaching for his waistband or reaching for the gun at the time when they shot him. And the Department of Justice used a legal standard and basically said that based on that standard, that these officers couldn't be found to be guilty of committing a crime. And basically, under that standard, the officers' actions have to be objectively unreasonable and they have to be willful. So here, they also pointed out how an officer is permitted to use deadly force where he reasonably believes that the suspect posed an imminent threat of serious harm to the officer or others. And the Department of Justice said that, they viewed the video and they talked about how the video was real grainy. They also talked about how there's no audio in the video. And they also talked about how it skips from time frame to time frame. So it's not the best evidence to use to make a determination as to whether or not these officers are guilty of violating his civil rights or guilty of a crime. And they also pointed out how the video does not show that Tamir Rice was not reaching for a gun, not reaching for the toy gun, but it also doesn't show him actually reaching for a gun. So based on that, they're saying that there's not enough evidence to prove that, that these officers acted in an unreasonable fashion. And also they talk about how they also pointed out the circumstances of them arriving on the scene. They talked about how they weren't aware that the person who called said that the gun may be fake and this is probably a juvenile. So they didn't know that information at the time. All they had was reports of somebody pointing a gun at people in the park. So that's what the Justice Department used to reach their conclusion that it would be very difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the officers' actions were unreasonable under the circumstances. So that is the situation, and I just wanted to talk about a couple of things about this development. I mean, this is a horrible situation. Here you have a young boy, 12 years old, killed, and there is no kind of semblance of justice. These officers are free to live their best life. They will not face any time in jail. No charges have been brought against them. So there is no justice for this young brother. They paid the family a settlement of like $6 million, which is really not a lot of money. That's peanuts compared to the value of human life, the loss of a son, the loss of a brother, a loss of a loved one. That is nothing, especially when you take into account that the attorneys are probably going to get at least a third of that settlement. They probably received at least a third. That leaves like $4 million. And then when you take into account taxes, the family is going to only have a couple of $1 million, which is nothing for the loss of that young brother. That young brother is dead at the hands of these police. And apparently none of these police will be held accountable for this. You know, they say that the police officers weren't unreasonable under the circumstances for the reasons that I previously explained. But I think that it is unreasonable for police to arrive on a scene and within seconds shoot and kill somebody. That's unreasonable. That's ridiculous. They didn't even take time to assess the situation, to evaluate the situation. And it is criminal. It's negligent that, the 911 caller, the 911 operator did not pass on that crucial information about the fact that it may be a fake gun or likely is a fake gun and that this is a young person engaging in this activity. It's just criminally negligent that that information was not passed on to the police. Also, so the thing that made it this abundantly clear after looking at this situation is just the fact that we need to have changes in the law. There need to be fundamental changes in the law because what they have done is they have used this reasonable police officer standard to basically justify the killing of many innocent black people. Because here you have a situation where this is a kid simply in a park playing around, just playing around like kids do. And he ends up dead for playing. It's illegal for young black men or boys. This is a boy, this isn't even a man. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later as well. But they have basically made it illegal for young boys to play, young black boys to play in particular. I think about all the times when I was a kid playing games such as Cops and Robbers, Cowboys and Indians, where we had toy guns. They looked very real. They looked realistic. They looked like they could possibly be a real gun. Any of us could have been killed by the police. If somebody made the wrong call to the police. Any of us could have been killed, and the police would have gotten away with it. So, this brings me to, a point. So first of all, the law has to be changed so that we can have a more reasonable type of standard so that these police can be held accountable for their criminal negligence. They need to be held accountable for this. Just like you hold, at the very least, there needs to be some kind of standard so that they can be held liable for or found guilty for criminally negligent behavior. Just like when you have reckless behavior, like if somebody is intoxicated and they drive a vehicle and they get into an accident, they are found responsible for that, even if they did not intend to kill people with their vehicle. There has to be some kind of change in the law to make it possible for these officers to face some kind of justice for taking away black lives. A young brother at the age of 12, his life is already gone. Snuffed out, wiped off the face of this earth because of the negligent and reckless conduct of these police. So yes, the law has to be changed, and that should happen on a federal level. We can't leave it up to these states to make their own individual standards for these police brutality cases. So that's the first thing, because a lot of people, I saw this post by Sean King, and he was basically saying, well, he asked the Obama administration to respond, and they didn't take any action. And, he asked Trump and them to respond. And, and we know about the decision that they recently made, which I've been talking about in this video. And even if the Biden administration, even if they were to say, conduct an investigation, ask the Biden administration to conduct an investigation of this matter, they would likely reach the same conclusion based on the legal standard that's in place for these police brutality incidents. So we have to change the law. So that's one thing that has to be pointed out. Another thing is this, man. These toy gun manufacturers, they need to be held accountable as well. They need to stop making guns, toy guns that look like real guns. They need to stop doing that. There needs to be some kind of identifying uh, labeling or some kind of way to distinguish these toy guns from real guns. They need to manufacture them in such a way that they do not look like actual handguns that that are real guns. So that way police officers aren't confused when they arrive on the scene. So that won't even be an issue or a question. That's something that needs to be done. They need to make these toy guns obviously and clearly distinguishable from these real guns, so that these police don't have another excuse to kill our young black boys and young black men and girls as well. And, that brings me to another point as well. And that deals with parents. We need to advise our children about about things like this. Many of us, unfortunately, because of the circumstances in which we live, we're forced to lecture our kids about what to do and what not to do when they encounter the police. And, this whole thing with toy guns is another conversation that we need to have with our young boys about playing with toy guns and stuff. First of all, we shouldn't even get our children toys that resemble real guns. That's something that a parent has control over. We are the ones buying toys for our children. So one thing that we can do is make sure that our children don't have toy guns that look like real guns. That's one basic thing that we can advise our children of. And also, we can advise them of where to play with toy guns and things like that if they're going to play with them. In a place like that, like a park where he's just playing alone by himself with a gun that looks realistic, I don't think that it's wise for a parent to allow their kid, a 12-year-old kid, to be walking around the park with a realistic-looking toy gun. So, I think that is something that we need to look at as well. And I'm not blaming the parents for what has happened. The primary responsibility lies with law enforcement and how they negligently responded to this situation. But we also have to, advise our children as well to try to avoid these situations as much as possible. And another thing that comes to mind with this whole thing is just about how our young people are viewed by the society. Young black people are viewed as being older than what they actually are, unfortunately. And because of that, they are treated differently from other children. Our children are treated like adults. The police responded to that young brother like he was an adult, based on the color of his skin as well. This, without a doubt, this whole situation has a lot to do with race. It has a great deal to do with race. If that was a white boy playing in a park with a toy gun, the police wouldn't have been so quick to rush in there and take that brother's life or that young man's life. If he was white, they wouldn't have done that. They would have assessed the situation, evaluated the situation, and acted accordingly. We've seen it time and time again how the police respond to white people who are armed compared to how they respond to black people who are armed. And this young brother wasn't even armed, but there's video footage of this, and I'll post a link in the description box to a clear example of this, where you have a white person walking around the streets with an automatic rifle, and you have a black person doing the same, and you see the night and day difference in the police officers' reaction to the same situation based solely on the race of the people involved. So, that's something that has to be taken into account. The races are taken into account. The fact that, the way these police responded instantly, assuming that this was a real gun, assuming that this young brother was a danger. Their response was based in large part to his race, without a doubt. And the fact that they viewed him as an adult tells you a lot as well. One thing that has to be pointed out, he was like 5'7", and I forget how many pounds he weighed. He was a large kid, but still, that doesn't, like, if the police evaluated the situation, they shouldn't have assumed that he was some kind of adult. And another point that I have to raise is this, man. We need to stop calling the police for everything, man, especially in the black community. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the person who called the police was probably a white person. But I'm talking to black people right now. We need to stop calling the police for everything. Stop relying on the police for everything. Because often, like, little domestic disputes, for instance, domestic arguments or problems that occur in the neighborhood, when you get the police involved, the situation escalates substantially, and too often, black people are killed when you get the police involved. So stop calling the police unless it's absolutely necessary. And I can understand how somebody may have looked at the situation and they may have said, oh, this is some serious situation. But even that caller knew that it was a possibly a fake gun, and that it was a juvenile involved. So instead of calling the police, that person should have waited to evaluate the situation, because if that person did so, Tamir Rice would still be alive today, probably. Now, the police claim that they told Tamir Rice to show his hands on multiple occasions during this particular encounter. And I highly doubt that that's the case. I highly doubt that they told him that, because it took them seconds to kill this young brother. They killed him within seconds. They didn't even give him an opportunity to raise his hands or anything like that. They just arrived on the scene. According to the reports, they drove their car onto the grass, and the car slid as they tried to stop. And then they hopped out of the car, and within seconds, they shot and killed that brother. They did not give him a chance to raise his hand. They did not give him a chance to say that it was a toy. They didn't give him a chance at all. If that was a white boy, they would have gave him every opportunity. They would have saw his life as having some kind of value. They would have saw his life as precious, or perceived his life as precious or something as sacred and stuff like that. But instead, when you have a young black boy, they view his life as expendable. They view him as a criminal just by virtue of the color of his skin. So here we have a young brother shot down dead, and there is no justice. They tossed the family a few coins, and they think that that's the end of it. To hell with that. If you are outraged about this situation, you should contact your senator and your congressman or congresswoman and ask them to pass laws that will reduce the standards for prosecuting these officers, because they have placed such a high standard for prosecuting these officers that it's almost impossible to bring charges against these officers, regardless of what administration is in place and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I have to say about this situation involving Tamir Rice. Man, it's a horrible tragedy. And if we want to see justice for young people, for our brothers and sisters, we need to pass that George Floyd law. I'm not sure if that includes a heightened, a lower standard for prosecuting these police officers or not, but that's something that I would look into. If that is not a part of it, that needs to be incorporated into it. So with that, please rate, comment, subscribe, like the video, share the video, hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content on here. Peace and blessings. Happy holidays, happy Kwanzaa, and have a happy new year. Peace.